Design Truth listeners will know that when I rope Paul in, that normally means we're doing an Australian episode. How does it how does it feel to be on second time round, Paul?
Just as nervous as the first time. No, it's good. It's good.
Do you remember the first episode you did?
Yeah, I think it was the guys Catapult, wasn't it? It was
good memory.
Nathan Troy at Catapult. Yeah, it was good. It was good, but it did it. I think it was a lot of interest, a lot of feedback, and I just think it's just good information to share with designers the world over. I think it's a very common subject, and there's lots of synergy with what happens in Europe to what happens here to the States. Yeah, its feedback was good.
Stuff, yeah. About 10 to 15% of our listenership is Australian, so we thought, why don't we give them something to listen to rather than having to listen to us over here? Just another designer from Brunel or something. We thought, you know what? Why don't we actually start roping in people that they actually know, rather than just us lot over here? And obviously, welcome, Andrew. There'll be lots of people that listen to this that might not know who you are. So it'd be great if you could just give us a very brief introduction to yourself and to Vert as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm Andrew Simpson, industrial designer. I'm the principal designer here at Vert Design. We're based in Redfern, which is just outside of Sydney CBD. So we've been practicing for 15 years. We design a range of products. The Australian market is a really interesting design market. We get involved in a lot of different areas and industries. It's agricultural products, through to the medical products, and standard design bread and butter of tech startups and sport and recreation equipment and the full gambit.
And what is life like out in Australia at the minute? Paint the picture of what's it like to go outside.
Yeah, well, it's particularly lovely. It's daylight saving at the moment. It's coming, February. It's the nights start to get a little bit cooler, but the days are still long, and it's 25 degrees Celsius, and
nice.
Yeah, it's particularly nice.
Yeah, we're recording this on the it's the 3rd of February, and it's pissing down down here. There's no way I can't be subtle about it. So it's raining, it's miserable, and every now and again I'll just get a text from Paul. I think the last one he sent me was when he was cycling around a lagoon or something, and it's a very different picture over here. But is everything okay, Paul? Because you was in lockdown, wasn't you, quite recently? You joined us in this lockdown thing.
We did. We joined the UK in lockdown. Yeah, Sydney had some cases up on the northern beaches, which put everybody into a bit of a panic. But Australia, I think, did the right thing, came down hard and fast, and the northern beaches were in lockdown, which I think started the week before Christmas and lasted until I think the week after New Year's. So it was hard and fast, and everybody adhered to the rules. And here we are with the COVID numbers that are sort of good news. We've kept on top of it. It hasn't run away with us, and I think that's a good sign to the Australian people, and that they conform and do what we've got to do.
And Brad, just to put it in some context, the Northern Beaches is a peninsula to the north of Sydney, and it's commonly known as the Insular Peninsula because it's unlikely that anyone from the Northern Beaches leaves anyway. So they were calling it a lockout, not a lockdown or a lock-in. It was basically keeping people out as opposed to keeping them in.
Yeah, I actually I stayed with you, Paul, up in the Northern Beaches for a couple of weeks. Yeah, it's lovely up there. So would you say life is 100% back to normal, or is it where would you rank it between 1 and 100% of normal?
Well, obviously it was a period of immense change. So and change has been very good, and we're sort of seeing some of the results of it. So I think a lot of people had time to do less, and I think which was quite good. We saw a surge in new product design opportunities. I guess we're in the business of change, I guess, and change created opportunity. And I think that we're seeing that change in a whole bunch of areas. People looking at more different activities. Surfing's booming and boat sales are up, and people are buying camper vans and doing more, I guess, family-based activities, smaller adventures, and there's a whole bunch of change that's going on. Changes in ways in which people are working, are refocusing on what they're doing. So in terms of the freedoms and activities we have, we're probably back to 90%. There's still some limitations on the number of people you can have in venues, and you have to wear masks on public transport, but that's sort of about the extent of it. Is that about right, Paul?
Yeah, definitely. We're waiting for. I think Scott Morris is going to announce any moment now that the social gathering numbers are going to sort of increase quite significantly, which means more venues and concerts and social gatherings are going to be okay as we start to ease those restrictions. But yeah, you're right. The whole landscape of working from home and just how it's affected people. Some really strange stats. Some of the coffee shops and cafes in the middle of the CBD are still not anywhere near full capacity because people are not going in the cities. But the regional coffee shops at the end of your street are seeing a booming business because people aren't going into the city, but they still want to go out for their walk or their cycle ride first thing, and are supporting the local cafes and coffee shops. So the suburbs are doing pretty well.
Yeah, Paul, we do work for a number of coffee roasters, and they can really measure that on a kilo basis, and they'll rattle off to us, this coffee shop was normally 14 kilos, is now 10, where this one that was previously 7 is now up to 14, and they really track the movement of people around Sydney through kilos of coffee.
Yeah. It is interesting. And I was speaking to a candidate the other day that had this this process that he would, on his way to work, he would leave the house, he would drive to work, he'd pick up a coffee and arrive at work, and that was his routine. And because he didn't have to go into the office, he still had to leave the house and get a coffee. So he would get ready for work, drive to the coffee shop, get a coffee, drive back home, and then start work. But for him, it was this routine, and it fitted really well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So tell us about Vert then. So it sounds as if you're doing. I had a look at the website, and it was a little bit architectural, and there was some product in there. It was this kind of fusion of kind of stuff really. Was that a conscious decision from day one, was it, or is that something that's just evolved over time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're practitioners in the design process. And I do some lecturing at different universities, and we teach the design process. And it has a bunch of steps to it, and I think over the years we've been able to apply that process to a number of different industries and areas, and I can see that less and less so. It used to be people say, "Oh, what do you specialize in, or where do you specialize?" I think, well, really, we specialize in the process for commercial gain. And it's and really the things that we're interested in is twofold. On one side, human attributes. What's the cultural context of an object? How do we have how does it meet our physical and emotional and cognitive needs? Where does it fit within the broader history of that category of product, or how we might do things as people? And then on the other side, are we interested in the mechanical? And how are things made? What are they made from? What are the processes and materials? And I think within those two understandings, we're really able to do a huge range of different products, because they all have that commonality. They're used by people, or designed for the benefit of people, and they are manufactured out of materials and have an existence. I think mainly the main way in which Vert Design has differed from other studios is we do a fair portion of our time, and it fluctuates. I'd say it sort of sits around 30% of experimentation with materials and processes, which we're then able to feed into new projects. And it really has been like a core to what we've done, for the 15 years we've been trading. And I guess the real payoff it has is it allows us to push the bounds of what's possible with innovation and materiality and processes without taking that risk on our client's behalf. We sort of do it in our own time through our own experimentation, and it then creates a safe, innovative option that we're then able to apply to more commercial projects.
I suppose that's the key agency side I've always found, is that sometimes I look at some agencies and you look at the nature of the work and you think, well, where's the commercial gain in this? It's art, it's very visual, but no one's making a return of investment on this. No one's, you're not mass manufacturing this thing. It's just, I find that sometimes is the subtle difference between one agency to another. Some is very experimentational and it looks great, but then another agency will be about actually, it's all about cost. It's all about getting the price point right. It's about build quality. It's all about all of these different things. And I found that some agencies are just, that's the difference. Some it's all about the commercial gain, and others it's a bit more about experimentation and that real kind of front end stuff. What have been, and it's a bit of a broad question, but what's been your main learning over those 15 years of being an agency owner? Because there'll be people listening that will be contemplating it. They'll be going through their own COVID challenges, or maybe they've lost a major client. I know we've certainly been there, Paul, haven't we? Where we've lost a client. We're still an agency at the end of the day. You're still scratching around, thinking, okay, what do we do next? What's your main learning? I know it's a really broad question.
It's a huge question. I mean, I've learned so many different things. I guess one of the big surprising things was that as a smaller agency. And it's changed very much now as we've matured and got senior people, more senior roles. But in the early days, the failings of the business were universally my own personal failings, and it seemed a process as much as personal development and growth as it was about running a small business. And that's improved and changed. But that was one of my first big shocks. That.
Do you think you have to go through that though, as a small business owner? Do you have to go through those failures to define what it is you want to be doing long term?
Potentially not. I think I had to. It's as I said, it was a process of personal development. I learned that I have to do that apparently. So I don't know if it's universal, and I've seen other people in similar positions who haven't experienced that. I guess some of the key takeaways, you mentioned the scenario of people who might be in a similar position or thinking of starting a studio. And I guess I'd found over the years that the best thing I could really always do was make the most of the single opportunity I had in front of me. So, able to be esoteric and plan, but nearly universally the best thing to do was a good job of the project I had in front of me. And that is a fallback strategy. Seems to work again and again and again.
You're never thinking about the work you've got coming up, or if I win this project, let's just nail down this bit of work. We do a good job on it, and naturally, we'll get a referral off the back of it, or we'll get another. We'll be able to quote again for the next piece. Focus on the work you've got in front of you, rather than thinking about, what have I got coming in next month?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So Andrew, you started the business in 2005, and you graduated from UTS Industrial Design 2005.
Yeah.
Was it a conscious decision that when you left university you had this vision that you were going to set up your own consultancy, or was it just one of the options that was open to you, or was the climate back in 2005 different, that it was tough and you just decided to do your own thing? What was that thought process that decided I'm going to turn left and not turn right?
No, I'd always wanted to run my own business. I come from a family of business owners and service professionals, businesses. My father worked as an engineer for large engineering firms, and my mother ran a large management consultancy. And I watched the difference, in what was available to them and what their general fulfillment in work was like. And I saw that, for me, the stress and unreliability of your own venture was more attractive than the lack of autonomy but security that came from the large multinational employer. And so it had always been my goal to do it, and I'd been really working towards that. So I sat on, even as a student, I sat on some advisory boards for some service businesses, and learned and I guess I got pushed into it earlier than I would have liked to. I had been working at some other consultancies, and I pretty much got the sack there. I could sugarcoat it, but really I got the sack.
Don't worry, we've not got them coming on in 5 minutes. This is your life. Don't worry.
And look, I had been, while I was a student, worked as a glass blower. So I had a job in a glass blowing studio. I ground and polished vases. Then I worked my way up into the hot shop and made vases, and then I'd moved into designing for them. So when I was unemployed, I went back and started making glassware and selling it, and made a reasonable success at that. So it was a pretty interesting endeavor. Like you said, back to, you wonder about how people are commercial. It's a really interesting microcosm of general business being a glass blower, because you have fixed costs of the rental of a studio, the raw materials you use, some labor that you might bring into it, and you have to, within your allotted time, produce goods of a higher value to your costs, and hopefully many margins higher. And it was fascinating. So I did that for a little while, and I was eventually going to starve to death. Like I could do it to a level, pretty quickly saturated the market that I had, and I had a friend of mine.
It's a process, right? So you've going back to the design process, the commercial process. You've understood fixed costs and all these kind of different things, and you just then replicate that process to something a little bit bigger than what it is now.
Yeah, definitely. And it was really a fascinating learning. And glass as a medium for design is fascinating as well, because it's reflective and transparent, and you're making these objects that have some limited functionality. Glass has a range of areas where it's great, and it's a really good training for design. It's you have to think about really how you see glass is the distortion of light. It's basically what you're viewing is the reflection or distortion of light, and really interesting medium to design in, and was really lucky that I got to know one thing very well. So I spent 4 years working in the glass studio, and in that time, I got to know a lot about glass. And really got to understand.
You're the guy for glass.
Which was it was really good for being the guy for glass, but also it taught me how to know other things really well. How to engage with a new process and learn about what its limitations are, and once you sort of start to understand how a glass bubble might expand into a mold and what surfaces touch the mold first, and then how the material flows, well, that learning is applicable to understanding how plastic might enter an injection mold, or or how metal might move when it's being worked in a wheel. Like, the same understanding of the movement of materials and properties did allow me to get a foothold, which allowed me to very well understand a bunch of other processes.
I noticed that one of your Good Design Australia awards was the soy fish. I just looked at everything from ski boots to the soy fish light, glasses of recycled material, and the interior sort of mantle design. A real eclectic awards that you've got, and there was more as well on Good Design Australia.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's thank you.
What a ringing what a ringing endorsement there.
That's right.
So just on the sort of Good Design Australia, you've obviously been part of the being the recipient of awards for some great designs. But I noticed that you've been sort of on the sort of the judging panel. Have you gone the other side and you've judged on Good Design Australia?
Yeah, I have. I've judged a couple of years at Good Design Australia, and I've also judged at some international awards, which was interesting. And for some reason, which I quite enjoyed, I got involved in the judging circuit for advertising and marketing. I guess they saw that the input of some knowledge of design was beneficial, which I think broadly it was. So I judged at Cannes for the Cannes Lions and was on a circuit throughout Dubai and Asia, and which was fascinating. It did make me think that industrial design, I mean, very much in Sydney, doesn't have so much of an awards culture. Like we do, it's good to get an award, but I think it's
a bit vanity though, isn't it? An award?
Yeah, it's. I think I've worked it out. It's the same thing when somebody says, "Please introduce yourself." I find it terrible. I have to do it at least once a week. Yeah. And I've noticed other people in other industries go, "I'm Bob, somebody from accounting, and I do this, this, and this, and this is why I'm good." And I go, how on earth did they do that? And I worked out, for a while I studied Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, and I got put onto him by Dr. Cameron Tonkinwise, who's a great philosopher out of UTS. And Pierre Bourdieu talked about these three forms of capital. He said we have like economic capital, which is money I have in the bank or property or some form of economic capital. Says I could have cultural capital, which is my artistic merit or a skill or attribute I have which allows me to, I might be like a ballet dancer, or it extends out to often prowess in sport, and so this idea of cultural capital. And he said we might have social capital, which is positions within society and status. So I think industrial designers are terrible at introducing themselves because we rely so heavily on cultural capital. And to express your cultural capital is to consume it, where what the asking of tell us a bit about yourself or an award is an explanation of social capital. And for us, it's egregious. It's as tacky as saying, I've got $1 million and I'm really wealthy. Do you know what I mean? It's just not.
I'm an award-winning designer.
Correct. It's because that should be inherent within my language and behavior or in the output of my creativity. Once I have to point to it, it potentially says that it is of little value.
Yeah, I think we spoke about it to Catabelt, didn't we, Paul? We said, do awards actually win you work? Like, is there a correlation between winning a Red Dot Award and then all of a sudden you just get a boatload of inquiries the next week? Is there this like correlation between the two, or is it just a marketing thing? Like, hey, we've won an award.
There definitely is for ad agencies and marketers. So I spoke to a bunch of owners of marketing firms, and they said we won a Cannes Lion, and the next week we won 5 big jobs. And I would think that would never happen within industrial design.
We did a Miro session the other week, the digital whiteboard. I don't know if you use it, Andrew, like a digital whiteboard brainstorming thing. And we did it with a few listeners of Design Truth, and we got together and just had a beer one evening and said, what do we do with this thing? People listen, anyone got any weird and wacky ideas, and we'll steal them, basically. Someone came up with the idea of a TV show, which was horrendous. So that's something that got a firm no. I've realised that if you get creatives to come up with ideas, that some of them, they don't really think commercially. There's no disrespect to them, like lovely people. Love the fact they've got all these ideas, but some of them you just go, why have you said that? Like, this is not going to be a TV show. But one of the ideas that came back was actually an award. So like Design Truth Awards. And I was speaking with Matt Plested over at the Fuel Pool. You're from the Allied, I don't know if you remember him from. He's actually going to be our episode 20, so shameless plug there. And he was talking about I think it was Red Dot or a European award he was talking about, and how it just started off as this like little thing, and then like, people just love awards. Like they love, people will pay big money to like get an award. Like it's like a thing. And then he kind of jokingly said, "Why don't you do a Design Truth Award?" People will want to have this association with truth. But going wildly off topic there. In terms of like Vert Design, what's the scale of size now? How many employees have you got?
Yeah, there's 9 of us as full-time staff, and then we have 2, extra people, that we call them, freelancers.
You just kind of come in when needed.
Basically, yeah, and that suits them and suits us. So, but a core team of 9, which is, I think, if you look at the stats, it's a manageable size for where everybody everyone in the studio are designers. We don't employ anybody in non-design positions. Partly that's possible because of the nature of modern outsourcing. Our accountants do bookkeeping. But we also, I guess, it's a very like a really great team. People that do look for improvements that could be made in our process or in our communications, and actively get in and make those improvements, which is it's a lovely thing to watch. It must feel some ownership and which I enjoy.
Yeah.
So with the sort of COVID situation and international borders closed for a year and foreseeable for the whole of 2021, sort of historically, Andrew, have you reached overseas to bring people to the business, or have you just spotted talent that's doing their usual sort of working holiday visa? You've engaged with them and they've decided to stay. How's that worked for you in the past, and has that sort of affected how, if you were to grow, how you might have to just purely look at the domestic market?
Yeah, definitely. So all of the above. We've engaged with international interns who've flown out and done their 3-month internship, and then we've sponsored them and kept them on. We've picked up people off working holiday visas who are uniquely skilled, and sort of helped sponsor them to become Australian citizens. We've also grown talent out of the local university graduates, and employed from all nationalities and races and genders and sexualities. So it's really been a wonderful mix of people. I think employing out of local talent, we have a returning expat population, which is quite interesting. I'm seeing people that have come from larger design markets who have arrived home and are saying, well, what's the Australian scene look like, and where do I fit? And I find that particularly interesting. We in the danger of being a big fish in a small pond. So it's really nice to bring in external influences. In terms of the closing of the borders, it's been good. We sit just south of the factory of the world, and we've seen like an onshoring of manufacturing. For years, we've really worked hard to back our local manufacturers, which hasn't necessarily been an easy task, and a lot of them are seeing dividends at the moment, which has been quite good for us.
Yeah, that's a really nice link actually to a listener question that we had. A chap called Paul English, great surname, and he sent us a question on Instagram. I don't know if you saw it, but it was around reshoring in Australia, and he asked, do you think it's possible? Do you encourage your customers to think about Australia made? Do we need more government incentives to promote reshoring in Australia? Is the Australian customer willing to pay extra for made in Oz when they have become so used to the likes of IKEA, Target, and Kmart? I remember when I was there, Paul, and we were kind of walking around Woolies and things like that, and I was like, it's very American out here. It's very harsh, and it's not subtle. You go to a a place that sells doors and they'd be called Doors. That would be the name of the shop. It's things like that used to make me. There's no subtlety. And the last question was, where would a designer look to find the right Australian manufacturer for their product? Has that been something that's coming up, particularly with COVID and China and all that kind of weird stuff?
For the first number of years, I can't say exactly how many, like 5 or 7 years of trading, we only used local manufacturing and built some really strong relationships with Australian manufacturers. At some point, we were no longer offering the best service to our clients by doing so, and we had to expand out and get things made internationally. There's a really interesting thing is that China is the factory to the world. So, when we work with a factory in China, they're also working with Danish designers and Swiss designers, and they're selling product in Uganda. And it's the knowledge base and the ability to invest in capital when you have that size market is substantial. So what we see in Australia is that there aren't fundamentals that make them uncompetitive. A lot of the metrics, if we look at injection molding, which is, the bread and butter of mass manufacturing, the machines are German or Japanese. The commodity plastics based on the Singapore oil price doesn't vary from Australia or Shanghai. And, a lot of machines are either fully automated or partially automated. So, the inherent cost within the production, it doesn't vary. It's things like tool making where we get the big variations in price. The question had a whole bunch of parts to it, so
it's a multi-layered question.
It does, yeah. So it's definitely possible to manufacture things in Australia at a price competitive way, and I can demonstrate 50 products in which we've done that. There is a couple of differences. The customer doesn't care is what sadly what we've worked out, and worked it out in big projects, run with multinational brands, and where Australian made is at the front and a unique point of difference.
Do you think they'll start to care
though? Well, I've got a little Venn diagram that'll show you this. It's so basically we could say that a product has a functional benefit. It does a thing. It has but an action has a functional benefit.
Yeah, there's a Bluetooth speaker in there, and it's
correct. Yeah. So it does a thing. So no functional benefit, no product. If you don't meet the base functional needs, you've got no right to sell it. People buy, depending on what category, but they buy emotionally. It allows them some better version of themselves, or an opportunity for freedom and relaxation, or to relieve some nagging stress about the general disorder of their lives. That's why people buy. And then they have to post-rationalize their purchase, and that's a cognitive benefit. So sadly, what we've learned is that, not in all categories, but in the vast majority, sustainability, Australian made, and price fall very squarely in a cognitive benefit. So it's not to say that it's not a reason for people to buy, but it still needs to lead with highly functional and emotive design that touches people. And without that ticked off, the Australian made makes no difference.
No, you wonder with Greta Thunberg and Attenborough and all these Netflix big push on things like sustainability. You go, for this younger generation and products that are aimed at that younger generation, I'd imagine that sustainability is probably right up there with what they'd be after.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't want to kind of go too deep into this, but if a product's aimed at a younger person, I'd imagine that'd be quite high on their list of. And whether that changes with age, as they go through education, as they start to go through the work, the amount of young designers, Paul, that will come to me and they want to change the world, and then you talk to them 3 years after a job and they start saying, it's all about cost, it's all about getting things for return on investment, and it's not about saving the planet and things like that. It almost gets beaten out of them, and you wonder if as they just get older, they always say you get a little bit more conservative as you get older. You wonder if that sustainability thing isn't actually going to be that high on there, and maybe it more aligns with what you mentioned there in terms of kind of people buy emotionally. I don't know, but I just feel that this
Well,
younger generation have a very different way of looking at life.
Yeah, I think sustainability is changing quite a lot. So the view you gave just there is what would maybe call a historic sustainability. And historically, sustainability attracted the worst designers. And again, I was part of the Sustainable Design Foundation that again came out of UTS. And Dr. Cameron Tompkin-Wise, who I mentioned before, is very much someone I look up to. He ran it and he articulated it very well. He said that, sustainable design routinely attracted the worst designers, and partly because it was a shifting of the goalposts. So, you might design an elegant chair that, that was ergonomic and beautiful and, had a lovely use of materials, and my chair's, a bit clumsy and ill-proportioned. Well, I shift the goalpost to say, well, mine's sustainable and yours not. And it was a way of making other people wrong. And you can see that through the protest movements of the 70s, and I guess a thing we see with larger brands where if they made a sustainable change, that often opened themselves up to further criticism, as opposed to people who'd called for the change rallying behind them. So we'd call that historic sustainability. I think it basically has reached a crisis point where that cohort who was interested in shifting the goalposts and being, other people being wrong, are now more and more becoming the minority, to people who say, well, actually, we've only got one planet, there's limited resources, we just need to get on with it. Yeah. And we're seeing that, Vert Design is French for green, it's sustainable design, and we've tried and periodically succeeded at implementing sustainable design. It's
hard though, right?
Pardon?
It's hard though, isn't it?
Very hard.
It's not easy.
Very hard. And it's very hard because the designers are uniquely ill-positioned to change the economic, social, political, organisational capital investment that are the leading drivers behind unsustainable action. So designers can identify the problem, we understand the ramifications, we understand our role within it, but our ability to actually make meaningful change is quite limited. So, you think the history of industrial design is around generating demand. We grew, out of the 1950s in a post-war boom and a way to sell more televisions. That's our grand history. So from the position of a profession that generates demand, how do you address unsustainable consumption? And then the actual palette of, opportunities are quite limited. So, one thing we've done is generate demand for waste. So we've looked at systems and said, waste is just an inefficiency. It's basically, everything is waste if you, waste it, or, in nature, there is no waste. So we've created products where we use its, provenance or its origins as a driver, and it produced demand for waste, and it's been quite successful. And other things we do is look at the general harm and, the system in which a product exists within.
Coming up to about 45 minutes, and there was just one thing that I wanted to talk about whilst you was on, because of your educational stuff. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts around the last, I literally, the last episode we did, and I hit the button on it yesterday, was we had 8 design graduates on in the UK, and they spoke about their experiences over the last 12 months, finding a job, working remotely. Very candidly, people kind of said what their experiences were. They were very kind about their lecturers and things like that. It wasn't one of those kind of sessions. It was about the realities of work, and I'll be very interested to see these designers in 18 months, 24 months, where they're stacking up in comparison to those that have been in an office environment, have had access to all the kit, all those kind of stuff. So we'll see how it goes for them. But you're a lecturer, aren't you, in your own kind of right? So how have you found the last 12? More so last 12 months?
I got a little bit of dinner before this, and I'm walking down to the Japanese restaurant. I ran into an old student, and he graduated 2 years ago. Actually, we'll probably get him in to show his folio, he's doing some, but it was just interesting. He left, he got a job at a business that provided equipment to airlines. So, food trays, and was designing that sort of toiletries that go for airlines. They were obviously very early affected by the coronavirus, and he left there and picked up a job at a consultancy which had Australia's largest airline as their main client. And so that didn't work out so well for him either. And he's very talented. He's been able to pick up more work, and I think we'll get him into his folio. But I think that's interesting. A young graduate having a very disrupted, very talented. It would have been the better graduate from the course I was teaching. But the cohort that's graduating now, it's been a very tough time for them. Industrial design, as much as we teach it at university, is at its core applied arts. It's the best way to. I look at the nature of design education, and it's an act of doing. You set a brief, you physically go through the steps of producing concepts and generating CAD models and prototypes, and it can be taught in a whole bunch of other ways other than the tertiary system. It's one of the sort of tragedies in Sydney is that the TAFE system has been eroded, and that they often produce some of the far better designers. So I think when people are having to practice an applied art remotely is quite difficult, because it's as much the creative communities and the cohort of peers that you work with that create the work ethic and strive to this isn't good enough, this is good enough. That all comes from the peer group in which you're with, and I think with the removal of that, it's quite challenging for the students. I think the design education in general is also quite challenging at the moment, and partly because of the growth and, I guess, spreading out of design and industrial design into other areas. We think here at the studio, we sell a product that is design thinking, and we'll be asked into non-design areas or non-manufacturing areas to apply our conceptual process and design thinking process to other problems, and it's quite successful. We'll also involved in user experience, and we need to know about electrical engineering and manufacturing and mechanisms, and the actual base of knowledge and what industrial design can do is so broad. And I think universities have tried to touch on all of those attributes. If you look at an undergraduate designer at the moment, they'll do programming of robots, they'll do Arduino and coding, user experience, graphic design, and at the expense of what was the traditional core applied arts subjects of drawing, CAD modeling, prototyping, base understanding of manufacturing, engineering drawings, these things that were at the core of what industrial design was. And with a course that goes from 4 years now to 3 years with trimesters, they are really just touching very lightly a range of subjects instead of being very core to what their understanding is, which is a complex problem to solve. Because a lot of the graduates won't go into what was a traditional, industrial design making things career. They will go into service and user experience and design thinking, and they'll end up working in an accounting firm. Do you know what I mean?
They earn a lot more money as well.
Yeah, potentially. But I wonder that what made industrial designers attractive in those areas was a mode of thinking which came out of this, the tools in which we have. So I often think that you can look at the design process just as a way of overcoming a range of human cognitive biases. We don't think particularly well in a range of areas, and design provides a whole bunch of tools that help us think better. It's drawing a picture of your idea. It was a great way to get it out of your head and evaluate it and make a bunch of decisions around its form and functionality and be more objective about it. And I wonder if would still provide students with the opportunities in lateral careers if we just did focus back on the core discipline of industrial design.
And whether the changes are actually of benefit to those that want to do that more. Let's say the jobs that you did when you went, you set your own agency. Is programming of robots really a relevant module if you want to be an industrial designer? I don't know, IDE or something like that, Paul. It's not, is it?
No, and it's interesting. I know it's a bit of a gripe for you, Brad, but I know you were on your soapbox about how the definition industrial designers have been hijacked by UX and UI industry, and you'll see a title industrial designer, and when you dig deeper, there's no product. It's all about the service and the journey of the consumer.
Well, I find myself every week saying, someone says something about product, and I go, we're talking about actual product, right? And they go, oh, no, we design banking product. I go, okay, oh, sorry.
Back in the
Andrew, Andrew, it's interesting what you say there, because from my side of the fence, I've seen those people, as Brad says, the UX salaries are quite high, but I've seen people that have been tempted to go from a physical product into UX UI, where they're working in the financial sector, and it's all about that journey of the consumer from the moment they get on the app on their phone or to when they walk into the bank in the CBD. But what's happening now is that some of those designers are feeling that they want to see an end result that's physical. They want to see the kudos of having a product on the shelf or seeing that they've made that difference, because some of the work they're doing is very much a sort of a theoretical exercise to satisfy the shareholders or to satisfy the bank, that they're looking after their customer and their customer experience. And some of the projects they've worked on might take 4 to 6 months, but they give a report, it gets looked at, and it gets filed. It will never be instigated. So a lot of those industrial designers are turning around saying, I'm keen to get back into something that's a physical product.
Yeah, I think what will happen, or if it's not happening already, is that agencies, the traditional product agencies, will diversify their offerings to their clients. So digital will form a part of that. So you'll see UX UI designers work at, I don't know, like PDD, Paul, or they'll have it's already, that will be the part of their offering, and the USP will be the fact that it's digital design that's correlating with a physical product. Whereas a lot of digital designers, and I don't touch the stuff. I mean, I don't really get a lot of it. But when I have tried to help a client or have helped a client with kind of UX UI people, I found that sometimes it's like very, very digital, and there isn't this kind of physical interface at any real point. And so it's this kind of hybrid of the connected experience or service to a physical bit of hardware. That is where the kind of the sweet spot will be for these kind of traditional agencies who are probably now bolting that into their service they're offering to their clients. It's like, hey, we don't just look at the actual thing that you can throw at a wall, but we're looking at the app that can kind of associate and the service design. So that's what will happen, and maybe that will be a route for product designers that are going into digital, is that actually you'll find that the employers will now start to build those kind of UI UX teams as part of a wider.
But I think it's been happening for 30 years potentially. Like, look at IDEO, really was one of the first to do it, and I think Frog Design was quite interesting. They had a attempt at entering the Australian market for design thinking maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I think we sort of came across.
But nothing of scale, though. Nothing of like. I can't think of many companies that we've worked with over the last 7 years, but where they've had a UX designer working with the industrial designers. It's almost like getting to a point where like every organisation will have an industrial designer and a UX designer working in kind of parallel with each other. I don't think that's been the case for the last 30 years, to my knowledge.
Well, it's interesting you talked about, an artifact and a desire to see one, as a result of your work. Then we can talk about objectivity and subjectivity. I do a lot of offshore yacht racing. I've done 10 Sydney to Hobart. I race on big 80-foot yachts. It's very competitive. And I found a really interesting thing with sailing, because it's a team sport and it's a highly focused team sport. But actually people are paid as professional sport, but it's nearly universally subjective as to the quality of the sailor. So if we've got a team of 20 people and the boat performs in a certain way, well, why did it perform that way? Was it Paul's trimming? Was it was it my helming? Was it the way in which do you know what I mean? So you end up with this whole bunch of subjectivity, and a subject like an environment where values determined subjectively is a really terrible environment to be in, because if I criticize your trimming, well, it shows that I know more. Do you know what I mean? And I've focused that you're necessarily doing the wrong thing. So I've often thought that's one of the great things of industrial design, is that we have at the core these objective truths. You know what I mean? Like objects exist and they're pleasing and they work. And back to that thing I was saying at the start about cultural capital or social capital, like to have an object that works just allows you to relax. We have at our core fundamental skills that people can't take away from us. So we know about how to calculate the load on something, and we can design these things, and we can draw pictures and make models, and produce, go home and make a boat. And it's really grounding and lovely because they're objective. And then I can relax. I don't need to tell you that I'm good at something or be praised, or because it's true. And I think
this is the thing.
It's an objective truth. And I think, if I look at stylists who are highly necessary to the success of products and do a great job, but at the core of their work is often a subjectivity. So in that who is the best stylist, the one that's perceived to be the best stylist, and there's often a lack of objective truth there. And they have to work so hard to manage their reputation, brand, and I think it's a tortured existence where we can relax a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's if you think about the job that we do, a lot of it is turning the subjective into the objective, right? So a CV comes in and portfolio. A lot of clients say, I don't really know what I'm looking for until I see it. It's I don't actually, I don't know what I'm looking for, but it's like when I see it, I'll know what I'm seeing. That happens all the time, doesn't it, Paul? Where it's like they don't really have an idea. So you turn it into the objective. So it's like, okay, you're probably going to want someone that's done agency, done this, done that. You just have a tick box. And if you tick most of those boxes, you've probably turned that subjective thought to something a bit more objective. And that's, I suppose, what we do in a weird way, Paul. If I was to try and explain it to someone, it's like getting that thought in the head of, this is what I want as a hire. But most companies have patterns, right? So it's like most people they tend to employ people from a certain university, or they'll be from certain backgrounds. If you ever look at past employers, a lot of them will be, a lot of them have done consumer electronics. If you actually look at the people they've hired, it's probably a good place to start to turn in that subjective, I don't really know what I'm looking for, to something that's objective. So we that's probably our daily job, Paul, is like getting into the mind of a designer and like actually trying to figure out what it is that they actually are looking for, into like just a couple of bullet points of like, okay, it's gonna be this or this. That stands you the best chance of them saying, yep, I like this one, let's bring them in.
And Andrew, it's a classic question that lots of candidates ask us, and we do try and advise them as best we can. And we've sort of collated some sort of information that we share with graduates. But you see a lot of CVs and a lot of portfolios coming across your desk and your computer. For you, what are the sort of the touch points that will make you stop and reread that CV again and think, this person's got something different than the other 20 that I've just looked at?
It's basically, it's brutal. And it's you get so many folios of such a high standard that I run it through some of the students to teach, and just sort of, and I say, don't judge me, don't be too harsh on me, but this is what we do. When you open it up, You scroll. Oh, that's interesting. Whatever.
It's all about empathy,
I mean,
right?
like
Isn't it?
and that's it. We've looked at a folio and you go, Jesus, do you mean I know that someone put their work into that, and it's the expression of years of learning, and but it's just the sheer volume we get that's the reality. So I think I say to people is the best folio you can find online is the standard. So I mean, it's not the standard isn't your graduate that you've studied with, or someone that you know. The standard is the best standard you can find. And I guess the other thing with folios is it's take out the worst things, or it's not an example of your progression as a designer. It's an example of the current best work you can do. And what we'll routinely see is someone feels it should be a certain size, so they've put in 10 projects, and one of them's great, hopefully their latest one, and then there's 5 that are sort of okay, and there are 4 that are terrible. And you go, well, just take out the terrible ones. Do you know what I mean? Like, and show us the example of what you can do today, because that's what we're looking for, is applied skills. And we're thinking, what work do we have coming in? What work would we like to be attracting? And does this person have the tangible skills that will let us deliver that?
It's one of those subjects where I think it's not that complex. It's you just end up you give the advice, and the advice hasn't changed for years. It is what it is, but so many people just get it wrong. And I've been speaking to a lot of people recently about it, and I think it's one of those unfortunate truths where a lot of people that go through the system aren't actually that great.
Yes,
and that because universities are businesses, I genuinely feel a lot of the time that people shouldn't actually be going through the system. There should be like it's a hobby. It's not a job. It's a hobby, and we should never take that away from anyone. And they should be able to still express themselves. But to have a career in it, you're not going to get the job at this kind of, because it's just not good enough. And it doesn't matter what portfolio advice you go on, what videos you watch, tutorials, all this stuff. It's just not good. It's just not good. It's just not good enough. That's just the unfortunate truth.
But a thing we've seen is, I think I've noticed it. I meet people in the broader community who have never studied a day of design and are at their heart designers. I meet guys in the back blocks of Canberra welding up motorcycle frames, and every nuance of the way they approach it is that of excellent design. Do you know what I mean? And with no formal training, and they just have the essence of a designer. And then I'll see other people that have studied an undergraduate and a postgraduate and just aren't designers. And it's I often think, well, it's not my idea. It was one of the senior designers here said he always thinks about a design studio like a band. And I think it's such an interesting analogy, because it is like a band. We've all got different roles we play, but what we really want is people that fit in and they don't disrupt the creative flow. And do you know what I mean? We feel some sort of energy with working with them, and ideas build on each other. And I guess like auditioning for a band member, I wonder how. Do you know what I mean? You quantify that sort of attribute to it, but also like a musician, knowing what the notes are is very different to being able to play, something that's exciting.
I'll that's a good quote. I'll steal that one.
Yeah, good.